Okay, now I'm just going to break the kata down as seen from the judges on either side of the main judge. So the person on the left is going to see me push the habaki, this collar that sits in tightly into the scabbard. And he's going to see me push this out and pull the saya back as I draw the sword and cut horizontally. And then I'm going to pull the point of the sword back by my ear and come up underneath the sword and cut. Then I'm going to push the sword forward out of the wound and bring it out to the side, and chiburi, I'm going to throw the sword out and down and point the sword at the enemy. Then I draw up to make sure that the enemy is inert. If not, I would go forward and thrust into him to perform a coup de grace. But because it is inert, I'm going to step back with my right foot to a safe distance and then slide my hand up to the mouth of the saya and bring the sword back so that it's between the thumb and forefinger, and then I push the sword forward, and using my shoulders, I put the sword back into the scabbard. Draw up, peel my hand off, and then retreat for the next kata. Now, on the second kata, okay, we're going to be viewed by the person on the right. And I'm going to have my back to the judges. And in doing this, my opponent is behind me. So from here, instead of coming around this way, okay, I'm going to surprise the attacker by turning to my left and drawing the sword towards him this way, and then step and cut. And then again, I'm going to bring the point of the sword back to my ear as I pull my saya back this way, and then come up underneath the sword, and then step forward and cut. And then again, push this sword out of the wound and chiburi, throwing the sword out and down, pointing it at the enemy. Drawing up and then stepping back to a safe position, and again, placing the sword in the saya. Okay, now, Sambome. In this one here, I'm standing and my opponent is coming from my left side. And now this is a very common thing in the martial arts. Because most of us are right-handed, okay, you want to flank your opponent from the left on his weaker side. So as I'm standing here, okay, my opponent is coming in this way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the handle of the sword, or scalp, towards my enemy, and the sword ends up like a roof over my head, and his sword hits the roof and glides by. So my back is to you this way, and he's coming from my left. I'm going to push the sword this way. So now the sword hits and glides this way. I tighten on the sword, and the sword comes up in my hand. This hand comes up, and at the same time, I move up with my right foot, and then I step back with my left, and I cut. This is biting into his shoulder and then slicing into his body. And now I push my left hand forward and bring the sword back so that it's laying on just behind my knee. And I switch this hand, and now I cut behind me and bring it up between my thumb and forefinger, and then again I use my shoulders to place this saya up onto the sword and pull it together. I draw up, make sure that my opponent is inert. If not, I can draw the sword again and cut it. But he's dead, so I come up, I take my hand up, and I retreat. Okay, on Seitei, number 4. I'm going to strike my opponent in the solar plexus. You do not have to kill your opponent every time. There are 3 techniques within the kata. One that strikes the person in the solar plexus. This knocks the wind out of him. I don't know if you've ever been hit in the solar plexus, but right here, just where your ribs come together, underneath, there's a pressure point there called the solar plexus. And if you're struck, say with the pommel of the sword, okay, it's going to knock the wind out of you. You're going to go, ah, like that. So in this, you come forward and strike that, and now you have an opponent behind you. So you pull the saya back and turn your body, and the sword sits on your chest here, and you punch to the left, and the sword comes up underneath your forearm. To reinforce it, you bring the saya to the center, and you stab into the person behind you. Now you turn back, and now your original attacker is starting to recover. So you raise the sword here, and then you cut. And then you do a yoku chiburi, or side throw of blood and tissue, and then place the sword back into the scabbard. Okay. Number 5. Your opponent has taken and drawn his sword like this and is going to cut you. Okay, so with his hands over his head, that means that his side is open. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to draw your sword and you're going to cut up this way here. And then you'll probably catch his arm, his sword will fall, and then you're going to cut back down this way here. And it's called Seitei-gata because the monks would wear a sash. The Buddhist monks would wear a sash from the shoulder to the hip. So now we're going to cut this way and then this way. So kesa is the name of the sash, and giri means to cut. So as I come forward, I'm going to take and draw my sword, and then I'm going to turn the scabbard so that the sword falls out of it and cuts up this way. And then I turn my wrist and I bring my hand up and grab the sword and cut this way. And I draw back, make sure that the body is inert, and then I step back and perform a chiburi, and then place the sword back in the scabbard. Okay, number 6, Morotetsuki. Morotetsuki means two-handed thrust. And this one that was the one that came right towards the camera. Doing it at an angle here, I come forward and I start a draw towards my opponent's face. And now that it leaves the scabbard, it comes over and hits him in the temple, and I cut to the chin. Then I grab a hold of the scalp and come forward and thrust it two-handed into his body. Now, I have an opponent behind me. I knew that he was there because I saw the attacker look past me, so I knew that somebody was there. So I turned my head, and as I turn my hips, the sword comes out of this first attacker, and now I turn and step and cut, and now I turn around and the third attacker comes, and I cut him. And then I perform Yoko Chiburi again, and Nodo. Okay, because of all the explanation, I'm going to do a separate video with 7 through 12. Okay?